They didn't just steal land. They stole silence, stole roots, built straight over something sacred, and never looked back until the letters started arriving, until the lawyers got quiet, until they realized every square foot under their perfect little neighborhood belonged to me, and by then, it was too late, because I didn't want it back. I wanted rent. Ever seen 120 families suddenly find out their homes sit on someone else's deed? Stay with me, because this isn't a revenge story. It's a real estate lesson they'll never forget. Subscribe for more true stories, where patience pays off. My name is Davis Rourke. I'm 61 years old, and I never wanted to fight the HOA. I just wanted to be left alone on the last 2 acres of land my family had held for 3 generations. But you know how these developments go. One day it's trees and birds. Next day it's drone footage, bulldozers, and promises of modern living with timeless charm. They called it Pine Brook Hollow. Only problem? They built it on my land. I wasn't even home when the clearing started. I'd taken 2 months to travel through Montana in my old RV, off-grid. Disconnected, no cell reception. By the time I returned, the entrance sign was already up. Welcome to Pine Brook Hollow, luxury townhomes from the low 400s. My stomach turned when I saw it, not because of the homes, but because of the border. The entire Phase 1 of their subdivision, 37 homes, 1 community center, and a chunk of private road, was sitting squarely across the southeast corner of my property. I pulled over. Checked my GPS. Checked the steel survey marker my dad and I had welded into the ground 30 years ago. Still there. Still right. So I went down to the HOA office. The receptionist blinked at me when I asked to speak to someone about land encroachment due. You have an appointment? I told her I had a deed. That got me a meeting. I sat across from a man named Michael Caro, who introduced himself as the HOA development liaison. Clean suit, polished voice, fake smile. You're saying we built on your land? I laid out the papers. Original deed. Updated plat map. County survey from just 5 years prior. Michael skimmed, shrugged, smirked. Well, this is interesting. I'll need to escalate it to legal. These plats shift all the time when municipalities rezone. I leaned forward. Quiet. Calm. Pine Brooks. Plat wasn't approved for rezoning until 6 months after these homes were framed. You didn't shift lines. You ignored them. That was a Friday. By Monday, I had a letter from their legal team, worded like a polite threat. We are confident in our position, it said. However, we're open to purchasing the disputed land at fair market value. Fair market? They were offering me $312,000 for 9.8 acres, on which sat 120 homes. I didn't respond. I just called a land use attorney I knew from back in my contractor days. Her name was Eleanor Groves, and she didn't ask me if I was sure. She asked me how far I wanted to go. All the way, I told her. I don't want them off it. I want them on it. Permanently. And paying for every square inch. We got to work. Eleanor pulled every building permit, every soil report, every utility diagram. The kicker? Not a single one referenced my parcel. They had used a composite plat. One. Stitched together using assumptions and outdated overlays, and no one had checked it against current county records. Not even the title company. It was negligence layered over arrogance, topped with a $20 million development loan. And all I had to do was stand still. The next month, I filed a quiet title action in county court. It didn't make the news. Didn't spark outrage, but it made every lawyer in their HOA management office go very, very still. Because quiet title isn't about evicting people. It's about declaring, this land is mine. Let's settle who gets to stay. Their legal team offered me a new number, $910,000. I declined again. Because I wasn't selling, I was leasing. Eleanor helped me draft a formal residential occupancy lease tied to the average square footage of developed land per home. The number? $867 per home, per month. Multiplied by 120 homes, that came out to just under 125,000 a month in land use. And I made it clear I wouldn't collect from the residents. I'd collect from the HOA. They refused, of course. Tried to drag the case out. Claimed I was extorting them. Filed motions to delay. But the court wasn't interested in delay. The judge reviewed our deed, reviewed the plat, and asked one question. Did you verify ownership before building? They hadn't. 30 days later, we won the quiet title action. The judge didn't evict the families. He simply ruled that the land beneath their homes was mine, and that any entity managing or profiting from that land, including the HOA, was liable for retroactive and ongoing rent. I'll never forget the day Eleanor handed me the finalized order, stamped, sealed, enforceable. You realize, she said, you just turned their dream neighborhood into a leasehold estate. I nodded. Good. Let them stay. She raised an eyebrow. You're not angry? Oh, I'm angry, I said. But I'm also patient. That's how I ended up with a 99-year lease agreement worth over $1.4 million a year, indexed for inflation, secured by lien, backed by court ruling. And every month, without fail, a six-figure deposit hits my account from the HOA's escrow. Not out of kindness, out of compliance, because they built where they didn't belong, and I didn't need to tear it down to teach them. Want to see how the HOA tried to fight back, and how I used zoning, utilities, and public access easements to make sure they'd never take another inch without permission? They didn't respond well. The day the court order hit, I could feel it ripple through Pinebrook like an underground tremor. HOA board members began showing up on site again, suits walking lots like generals after a lost war. They didn't speak to residents. They didn't speak to press. They spoke to surveyors and land consultants. And quietly, without announcing a thing, they began redrawing their own development plan, trying to find a loophole. But they weren't the only ones playing the long game anymore. Spent the next 3 weeks walking the perimeter of my land, line by line, stake by stake, marking where their utilities crossed into my property. You see, Pinebrook's main electrical grid, stormwater trench, and part of their fiber backbone didn't just touch my land. They cut through it, illegally. No recorded easements, no utility access deeds. They'd assumed the land was theirs and wired the whole neighborhood like it was. So I filed again, this time with the County Utility Oversight Board. Eleanor called it a chess move. I called it Step 2. At the next HOA meeting, I sat quietly in the back row as Michael Caro stood at the podium talking about unexpected compliance costs. He didn't mention me by name. Didn't need to. Every homeowner in that room already knew. The rumor mill had done its job. People weren't angry at me. They were angry at him. The man who led them into this trap, who spent their dues on lawsuits, who told them everything was approved, just a formality, and never checked the foundations they built their lives on. And now, every month, the HOA dues were going up, so they could pay me. The first public shift came subtly. A mother from Lot 84 stopped me while I was loading firewood. You're Mr. Rourke, right? I nodded. She didn't yell, didn't accuse. She just said, thank you for not making us move. We didn't know. That was the first time I realized the community wasn't against me, just the board that misled them. The second shift came from inside the HOA. A man named Kevin Liu, one of the newer board members, requested a private conversation. We met at the old feed store coffee shop. I know you're within your rights, he said. I also know the board was reckless. I said nothing. He slid over a folder. Inside, meeting minutes, internal memos, and email threads between developers, board members, and title reps. They knew, Kevin said. At least 2 of them did. They were warned the plat wasn't clear. They moved forward anyway. I looked at him. Why show me this? Because you should know how deep it runs. And because I think they're about to do something stupid. He was right. 2 weeks later, the HOA filed for a replatting request, asking the city to redraw property boundaries in a way that excluded my land, essentially erasing me off the map. But they forgot two things: that the quiet title ruling had already established legal precedent, and that I now had proof of their prior knowledge. Eleanor and I filed a response the next day, attaching Kevin's memos as evidence of intentional development over disputed property. The city didn't even grant a hearing. The request was denied on arrival, and a quiet warning was issued from the planning office. Any further attempts to override zoning boundaries or suppress easement rulings will be referred to the district attorney's office. Check, and nearly mate. But I wasn't done. There was still the matter of the road. Pinebrook Hollow had one primary entry road, a long winding drive lined with decorative oaks and HOA-funded lighting. It also happened to curve right through my land for 137 feet. Guess what didn't exist? A road easement. So I offered them $1 per year for the next 30 years, non-renewable, conditional upon full monthly land lease compliance. They laughed at first, until Eleanor reminded them, "If you decline, Mr. Rourke has every right to install a gate at his property line." They signed within a day. And that's how the road into Pinebrook Hollow became legally known as Rourke Crossing. They removed the HOA-branded signs, replaced them with a county-mandated access marker. Residents noticed, asked questions, got answers. And for the first time, Pinebrook wasn't just a housing development, it was a lesson. One night, I was out walking the creek trail on my side of the property when a group of teenage kids, neighbors now I suppose, waved me over. "Hey, are you the guy who owns Pinebrook?" I smiled. "No, just the dirt under it." They laughed, then asked, "Is it true they built the whole thing without asking you?" "Yup." "What did you do?" "Nothing. Let 'em finish." They stood, silent for a beat. Then one of them said, "That's kind of awesome." I nodded. It was patient. The HOA tried one last time to save face. They hosted a community visioning session to rewrite their charter. New leadership, new mission, and an open invitation for constructive engagement with surrounding landowners. I didn't attend, didn't need to, because while they talked about vision and future cooperation, I was filing one more document with the county, a conditional perpetual lease extension, 99 years, automatic renewal, linked to any and all infrastructure use tied to Pinebrook. It meant that even if the HOA dissolved, even if Pinebrook rebranded or merged into another entity, the obligation to pay me would remain. Attached to the land, written into the ground. Want to see how Davis flips the final legal twist, turning his quiet win into generational wealth that no HOA lawyer can ever erase? When you live long enough, you learn it's not about punishment, it's about permanence. Anyone can file a lawsuit, anyone can shout at a meeting, but when you write something into land records, that stays, the conditional perpetual lease. Extension was more than a power move. It was a trap with no trigger, already sprung. A silent mechanism tucked neatly into the county books, clear as daylight and just as irreversible. It meant that the HOA couldn't wait me out, couldn't rezone, replat, or renegotiate once I was gone. Every inch they used, roads, fences, utility boxes, remained under my terms, forever, and to enforce it, I assigned the enforcement rights to a third-party legal trust, one that would continue collecting those monthly lease payments long after I was gone, splitting the proceeds between a veterans relief charity and my niece, who teaches fourth grade in Kansas. The HOA didn't respond publicly. They didn't dare, because if there's one thing worse than fighting a man with a lawyer, it's realizing he's already built your cage out of contracts. In early spring, I got a visit from a man named Mark Breslin, an auditor from the county tax board. He was polite, cautious, curious. "We're reviewing property classifications for multi-use plots in Pine County," he explained. "Yours is unique," I chuckled. That's one word for it. He asked if I could walk him through the ownership structure. So I did. Showed him the original deed, the quiet title judgment, the utility encroachment rulings, the lease structure, and, finally, the permanent, conditional extension. He sat in silence for a long time. Then he leaned back and said, "You've built the cleanest, most ironclad passive income mechanism I've ever seen." I shrugged. "Didn't build it. They did. I just kept the blueprint. That summer, something strange happened. A couple from Lot 39 sent me a thank you card. Handwritten, no return address. Inside was a photo of their toddler running barefoot through the grass near the road that now read Rourke Crossing. On the back, it read, "We may have bought into a mess, but you made it livable. You kept us here. Thank you." I tacked it to the wall beside the first lease deposit stub, not out of pride, but out of proof that a quiet wind still echoes. Meanwhile, Pinebrook Hollow was changing, not visibly, not dramatically, but internally. HOA board members quietly rotated out. New faces joined, younger, wiser, less arrogant. The community garden, which once sat squarely across my landline, was moved, 18 feet back. Permits were submitted, plans reviewed. They even sent me a courtesy letter asking for buffer planting advice. I smiled when I read it, because the man who'd once waved off my deed like a nuisance was gone, replaced by a board that understood something deeper. Land remembers. But the final twist wasn't legal. It was poetic. The county issued an updated zoning map, reflecting all changes made in the last 2 years. Pinebrook Hollow's official parcel boundary had been redrawn, not to include my land, but to work around it. My 2 acres, once invisible on their planning brochures, were now highlighted in beige, stamped with a 4-word label in crisp municipal font. Private leasehold, Rourke Estate, not disputed. Not under review, not shared easement, just mine, right in the middle of their perfect subdivision, like a scar that healed the wrong way. Eleanor came by a few days later with a bottle of wine. "I got a call from a local law journal," she said, grinning. "They want to write about the Pinebrook precedent." I laughed. "Catchy." She leaned against the porch rail and added, "You've created a model, a real one. Passive control, ethical enforcement, no displacement. You flipped the script. Didn't mean to. But you did. Most people want revenge. You built legacy." I poured her a glass. "Legacy's quieter," I said, "and a lot harder to erase." A few months later, I filed one final document, a land covenant, notarized and attached to the lease terms. It did 3 things. Banned future HOA purchase attempts, barred any future owner from dissolving the lease, required any structure replacement, touching my land to carry a plaque stating, "Constructed under private lease by consent of the Rourke Estate." A formality? Maybe. But it mattered, because one day someone would ask what that meant, and someone else would say, "Oh, that land? You don't own it. You borrow it." Want to see how it ends? How Davis's land outlasts HOA plans, real estate cycles, and even time itself? The day I finished sealing the last covenant, I walked the full boundary line at sunrise. Boots in damp grass, coffee in a thermos, sky pale and stretched, the kind of quiet only people without alarms ever hear. The land didn't look angry anymore. It looked whole. Kids rode bikes up and down Rourke Crossing like it had always been called that. The new HOA board put out a quarterly newsletter that, surprisingly, featured an article titled, "How Our Land Agreement Made Pinebrook Stronger." They didn't name me. Didn't need to. The subtext was clear. You don't need to control everything. Sometimes it's smarter to respect the foundation beneath you, even when you didn't pour it. The irony? I never built a single house. Not one. But my name sits in more paperwork than the builders who broke ground here. Eleanor once joked, You own more lines of ink than square footage. She wasn't wrong. But land ownership isn't about fences. It's about understanding. That patience, paired with preparation, outlasts everything, even boards, even blueprints, even time. The first time my niece visited after everything settled, she parked on the gravel loop near the southern trees and stepped out in teacher sneakers, eyes wide. "This is your land?" "Yup." "All of this?" "Especially the parts." "With fiber cables under them?" I grinned. She laughed, shook her head. Then she got quiet. "You didn't fight them with bulldozers. You used their own rules." "Didn't have to raise my voice," I said. "Just had to let the paper speak louder." That night over dinner, she asked what would happen when I passed. "You're leaving all this to the trust?" "Half," I said. "You're the other." Her eyes widened. "Me? What am I supposed to do with a lease-controlled HOA trap?" "Nothing," I said. "Just keep collecting, and teach the next one to do the same." She looked out over the yard. "You know Uncle Davis? You turned their dream homes into your retirement." I chuckled. "Nah. I turned their arrogance into an annuity." The last time I saw Michael Caro, the original HOA dev liaison, was at a land planning forum. He didn't speak to me, but I watched him walk by the large map display of Pinebrook Hollow, now clearly labeled with private. Leasehold, Rourke Estate cutting right through Phase 1. He paused, stared, then moved on. No words. No nod. Just a man walking past the ghost of a mistake he thought no one would catch. And the houses? They're fine. People live, mow, cook, raise families. And somewhere in the background of their normal, my name keeps things upright. They may never know it, but they live on borrowed dirt. A local podcast reached out once, wanted an interview about the legendary land flip, they called it. I politely declined, because this story isn't about me. It's about the space between right and almost right, about the gap between zoned and owned, and what happens when the people who draw the maps forget to double-check the deeds. There's peace now. Not in the HOA rules, not in the quarterly payments, but in the land itself. The creek that edges the western slope flows steady again. The trees I planted decades ago sway like they've finally found their rhythm, and no one's poured concrete where it doesn't belong since. Because they can't. Because I made sure of it. Every year now, the trust sends me a report. Total collected. Total allocated legal reinforcement status. Educational grants disbursed. That's the best part. Part of the lease profit goes to a scholarship I set up, funding local high schoolers going into environmental law and real estate planning. Funny. How full circle it becomes. A neighborhood tried to erase me, and now their land funds the next generation of watchdogs who'll stop it from happening again. Sometimes I walk the line just to feel it, the invisible border, the weight of what they thought they could take, and the satisfaction that I didn't. Have to knock once, just wait, and write. Eleanor retired the following year. She left me one final note before she closed her firm. "You're the only client I've ever had who turned a land dispute into a legacy. Most people want to fight loud. You showed everyone how quiet power holds longer." Years later, people still move into Pinebrook. Some learn the story, some don't. But every single homeowner signs paperwork that includes a clause, buried near the back. This property exists under a recorded perpetual lease. Monthly dues include proportional access to Rourke Estate land. They initial it. They move in, and the ground stays mine, because in the end, I didn't bury them in lawsuits, didn't flood their homes, didn't raise a fist. I raised a pen, and I waited, and they built everything on a foundation they didn't check. They built their homes on my land, so I built my legacy under their floorboards, and now every sunrise they wake to still belongs to me.